take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy?
I'm a human being. God damn it! My life has value. It's time to ask yourself what you believe.
Mass murder, torture, perjury, embezzlement, fraud, deception, treason. These are just a few of your many crimes against humanity. You will not win this war, for you are fighting the very essence of humanity.
Hi, welcome to Truther Talk. I'm April Bowden.
And I'm Virstyne Henry.
Please visit our website at truthertalk.com, where you can find our Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, our archived shows, our essays, etc., etc. Please check us out if you like. Today's intro segment, we're bringing back Dawn Winkler, who we've had on the show. This is her third time, I believe, on our show. She is the California State Co-Director of the National Vaccine Information Center and Executive Director of Health Advocacy in the Public Interest, or HAPI, H-A-P-I. You can find out more at nvicadvocacy.org and the Facebook support group Californians Against AB 2109. Please welcome to the show Dawn Winkler. Hey, Dawn.
Hey, April. Hey, Virstyne. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I have to make one correction. It's not your fault you didn't know, but I'm not the state California state co-director anymore for NVIC. I have resigned for personal reasons, but it's no hard feelings. I wish them well. I'm just needing to kind of do my own thing at this point. So I'm kind of out here a little bit, not on my own, but just kind of working more closely with California folks, because we've got to focus on our state, and we've got to have a lot going on.
Gotcha. Okay, so you were with the NVIC, but you're not anymore.
I'm not anymore. Not that I don't absolutely promote, using their website and using them as a resource, and by all means joining the advocacy portal where you can stay apprised of any legislation that may be affecting California at any given time. It's just I would hate for it to be put out there that I'm still the state co-director when I am not.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah, sorry, I should have.
Oh, that's okay. No problem.
So, where do people get in touch with you or see your work right now if they want to come reach out to you?
Right now, I still have my email if people want to be on my list, or if they want to contact me personally, they can contact me at hapi.vaxinfo@gmail.com, and I'm pretty active on the Californians Against AB 2109 page. Even though that bill, is over, we've kind of left the name of the page the same, and probably will for the foreseeable future, just because it has such a strong presence and membership that we don't really see any reason to change the name at this point. But those are two great ways to get in touch with me or see what's going on. And again, I do still encourage people to, sign up with nvicadvocacy.org, because they can always stay apprised of legislation, and it's a great way for them to also get their legislators' contact info at the click of a button.
Gotcha. And you are still very active in what we call like the vaccine truth movement, and trying to just let everybody know what's really in a vaccine, what these things are actually doing to people, as opposed to, what they're kind of being fed in the mainstream or the mainstream news or mainstream medical health industry. And so one question that we wanted to ask you then, since you are so active in that, is how do you approach talking to your friends and family about how dangerous vaccines are?
Well, it's changed over the years, I would say. When I look back, 17 years ago when I first started in this, as you probably know, the conversation almost never really happened. If it did happen, it was relatively uncomfortable. It seems like at least as controversial as things might be currently, I'm happy to see that these conversations do happen on a much more regular basis. And I guess, the way I approach it is I let people know, that I have information, that I am involved, and I kind of see where they want to go, what angle they want to come from. I mean, as you know, right now we're smack in the middle of this over-hyped up flu season, and so that's always a good starting place. People bring that up all the time, and you know, I guess it's different from person to person, but right now I'm having a lot of conversations about how people have this huge misperception that they want to call everything the flu, and they don't understand that everything is not the flu, that actually, you know, actual influenza requires you to have respiratory symptoms. And so I think it's dangerous when people label everything the flu because they don't even realize that the vaccine, as ineffective as it is, it's not even designed to prevent such things as viruses that simply cause you to vomit or other symptoms. And so we have this people just reacting based on fear, and everything's the flu, and oh, you should have had your flu shot. And I don't know, I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing around you, but people are absolutely, it seems, out of their minds with fear over something they don't even understand.
Right. Yeah, and people seem to be so afraid to get sick when it's just a normal part of life. You know, we all got sick as kids, and most of these so-called vaccine-preventable illnesses we got when we were kids, you know?
And we survived.
Absolutely.
We survived, yeah.
And it's all part of just strengthening your immune system and everybody, and this fear-mongering that goes on. You know, Dawn, I was telling Virstyne about this on the last show. There was this program on the news, and they were talking about this little boy who had received the flu vaccine, and he died on Christmas Day because he had a reaction. And you know, it was horrible, and the family is talking about it on the news. And at the end of the reporting, they still sit there and say, but the flu vaccine is still your best protection against the flu.
Absolutely.
How
and
dare
I
they,
think
you know?
they're also, it seems to me like they're going a step beyond, and they're pushing Tamiflu, the antiviral, and they're saying that, you know, well, not only should you get the flu vaccine, but, you know, hey, you can still get the flu, which we all know that because it's ineffective and it actually may cause the flu. But, you know, you need to think about getting this antiviral medication too, and never mind all the side effects in the product insert, because, you know, as long as you do both of those things, you'll just be fine. I find that tragic and horrific, and I know that there was a case of that in Oregon where they've duped this poor mother into believing that if only her son would have received Tamiflu, he would have been okay. It's just tragic to be, I guess I would call it tricking people into believing that somehow toxins equal health and, you know, aren't actually poisoning you.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I just did some research on the measles outbreak that happened back east in, I think it was like 2010, and I read this from the CDC report, and it said that like 53 of the 54 people that got the measles already had their vaccination for measles, and then at the end of the report they're still saying, but the measles shot is the most effective way for preventing measles. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right. It doesn't even make sense.
Like,
it really doesn't.
Like, so, but how did they all get the measles if they had, you know, the measles shot? But it's still the most effective. It's like, this is bullshit. Excuse me.
Exactly. And it's just like the people that want to, you know, say that they're afraid to have their kids around your kids, and, well, but your kids are vaccinated, so what are you afraid of? If you know, if you believe in it, if it works, why are you afraid of my unvaccinated child? So
no, but you're putting
most of their logic, it doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold any water. So it's frustrating. I would say, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I feel like things are really kind of ramping up. Amping up, it's like there's just full-on push from the other side.
Well, because I feel like... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, well, I wanted to say because I feel like people are actually looking into this information, and really people aren't taking the flu shot, so they're getting scared. If they feel, you know, they have to force vaccination on people, and obviously it's not... you know, their propaganda isn't working, you know?
Absolutely. You know,
So-
I don't know if you saw this recently, but there was a really good, I believe it came straight out of a product insert, but it was information on shedding of the flu virus after receiving the nasal flu mist vaccine. And it showed that, you know, not only do people shed the live virus after receiving that vaccine, but they can shed for up to 28 days. And the group that shed the most, in other words, out of, you know, the biggest percentage out of, say, a group of 100 was in very young kids. A bigger percentage of them showed, you know, the virus shedding in their saliva and mucus, as opposed to kids that were a little bit older. But then I believe it was the teenage group that shed the virus the longest. So clear up to day 28, they were still shedding this live flu virus. And then people they act so surprised that as soon as we start these mass flu vaccine campaigns, that, oh, we have these flu outbreaks in our communities. And I just sit there and say, are you really shocked? You know,
Right.
And then you have to ask when you see the news and they want to talk about all these cases and deaths in the emergency rooms. You know, how about telling us how many of those people had the vaccine? I'd really like to know.
Probably all of them.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like,
Yeah, it's a
you know,
convenient
they
thing
don't want to
leave
tell you
out.
that. They don't want to tell you that. You know, oh, they died of the flu that we put in the vaccine. You know, they don't.
Right. I don't know. I like to think that people are waking up, as much as, you know, I still do see people and hear people talk about, you know, they're sort of, you know, they're in two camps. I mean, there's people waking up, but then there's also people that they just can't really go there, and they're all too happy to believe the warm, fuzzy side of it, and that they really need to do it. And then I'll hear them say things like, well, you know, they're just torn, and there's science on both sides. And I think to myself, you know what, I've been doing this for almost 19 years, and I have yet to see science on the other side that actually
Yeah.
supports safety, efficacy, or necessity. Please show it to me, because I haven't
Right.
found it yet.
No, all they like to do is just talk smack about how crazy people are that don't want to vaccinate. I watched a lecture on Paul Offit. Are you familiar with Paul Offit, right?
Oh, yes, I am.
And it was called the video. Now I don't know if he entitled video this or the person that uploaded this video entitled this, but it was called communicating vaccine science to the public. Not one thing he said was about vaccine science. The whole lecture basically was about him ridiculing and demeaning people that didn't vaccinate.
Right, that sounds
It's
about
crazy.
right.
And a lot of this forums I've gone on to who are on the other side for pro-vaccinations, that's all they do. And then you give them information and they don't want to even look into it. It's just, you know, April and I were talking about this today. It's like they're more concerned about being right as opposed to what the real truth is. You know?
Exactly.
And
Don't confuse me with the facts, you know. That's just very
Obviously.
inconvenient.
Yeah, you know. So I just want to switch gears a little bit because the last couple times we had you on our show, we talked about AB 2109, and which is the
Right.
latest vaccine law in California. So is there any way you can just remind our audience what it is and what happened with it and where we are now?
Sure. AB 2109 was a bill that changed California's personal beliefs exemption, which, you know, we've had for years, the ability to sign our own personal beliefs exemption. End of story. Just sign, it's against my personal beliefs, I'm not vaccinating my child, and that was good enough for your child to attend school or daycare. AB 2109 changed that so that parents have to seek the signature of a health care practitioner, which is pretty narrowly defined, on a separate form. And this is an important point to make for the people listening, is that we still have the right to write our own letter of affidavit. That is actually separate, and you're allowed to write that separately, just one sentence. I personally am against vaccinating, period, sign it. That you do not have to sign their affidavit, which has self-incriminating information. However, the law does require you to go have a healthcare practitioner sign off that they have supposedly educated you about the benefits and risks of vaccines, as if they're ever going to tell you any of the risks. That's a complete joke.
Yeah.
So the form is really complex because it's got 3 parts, and it's just misleading, and so parents need to be really careful when they're looking at the form and trying to complete it. There is a place for religious exemption, but it's asking you to sign off that you not only have religious beliefs against vaccines, but that you are part of a religion which doesn't allow you to seek medical advice or treatment. So
which makes you look crazy. That's terrible.
Right, and it's clearly a violation of our religious freedom. But it's very tricky what they've done, and only time is going to tell what's going to happen when the wrong person signs that and is challenged, or the wrong person doesn't want to sign it and wants to take legal action. We'll see what happens. But another really, really important thing to bring up is that some school districts were using a form that's not created by the state of California. It's an American Academy of Pediatrics form, and there's a couple of versions of it, but either way, the AAP form is horrible. It's extremely self-incriminating. If you sign that, and a lot of districts were tricking parents into signing this form, it's basically the parents signing off that they're agreeing that by not vaccinating, that they're putting their child and everyone else at risk, and the wording is just horrific, and so I really caution people to not sign that kind of form, and they're out there. And so now we're in this area where we've got a couple different AAP forms. We have the state form, which is a mess and confusing, and parents really need to be just extremely cautious about what they're signing, because they could be setting themselves up for a lot of trouble down the road.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's what AB 2109 did. In my opinion, it took away, though we do have the right to an exemption still on the books, it took our right away to not take our children to a practitioner that we maybe don't want to take them to, because it's forcing you to go get that signature unless you're going to go ahead and take the religious exemption. And then the way it's written, it's so restrictive that, like I said, there's no other way to say it other than it's a mess. That's really all I can say about it at this point.
Yeah, and it is, as you say, self-incriminating to sign some of these things, because it's going to make the parent look like, well, I can't even seek, I have a religion that, so I can't even seek medical advice. I don't know if you heard about the story about the Amish girl who was diagnosed with cancer, and then the CPS took the child away because the parents didn't want to give her chemotherapy.
Right.
And, and so this is kind of not that far-fetched to say that these kinds of things could start happening when people start refusing to sign these forms, or start refusing to vaccinate their child, or they do sign it and then they sign it saying that they're not going to vaccinate their child against their doctor's wishes or their doctor's recommendations or something like that. If they go that, and they're self-incriminating themselves. I thinking that they're exercising their rights, but then actually putting themselves in a position where they're looking like they're being negligent parents.
Exactly,
and
it's just insane, because let's face it, just because you could very well have personally held religious beliefs, or you could belong to a religion. It's none of the state's business, first of all. But you could be in a situation where, your religion or your personally held religious views do preclude vaccination, but they don't preclude you from taking your child to an emergency room if they break their arm. This is just common sense.
Oh,
But It's a trap.
I had a student yesterday. I'm a teacher, Don. I had a student yesterday tell me that a friend of his broke his arm, and I guess they're of Chinese descent, and his father wanted to take him to a bone setter, and the school called, I don't know, the government on him, and was like, well, you need to send your child to a hospital and get him a proper X-ray. If not, you're going to go to jail. You know? That's insane.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Wow. That's insane. I mean, we are really, as much as it's hard for me to think about and face, the reality is we are actually, I believe, there's a couple of different things out there. You know, Aldous Huxley and Brave New World, you know, there's a quote in there about, you know, getting to this place where we are, you know, people are totally fine with kind of becoming enslaved because of the pharmacological state that is being forced upon us, and then also that at some point, I think it was Dr. Benjamin Rush, a founding father, who stated that if we did not put medical freedom into the Constitution, we would eventually find ourselves at a point where we face the Bastille of medical science, which means basically we're a prisoner of medical science, which I firmly believe we're pretty much there. It's probably going to get worse, unfortunately. It's like, honestly, they have their hooks and in every single aspect. I live in a very small community, and unfortunately what I've seen is that even here, despite having a population of what used to be, I considered, very free-thinking, outside of the box, organic eating, you know, all of this stuff, they've got their tentacles even into my community to a point that makes me sick. It's really hard to watch. It's very difficult to see how much control the medical establishment actually has over things I never thought I would see.
Wow, yeah, talk about it.
Yeah.
I know what you mean, you know. Sadly, because I think we're all starting, if you're in the know, you kind of, I guess to use, you know, another analogy, like of the movie They Live, you kind of wear the glasses and can see it.
Yeah.
You sort of, you start to see it, and you're starting to see it more and more, and how many people aren't, you know, alert, and don't have their own set of glasses where they can see through it, and yeah, and it's sad and it's scary, but is there anything that we can do? I mean, is there anything that's being done currently to try and reverse this AB 2109, or is there anything?
Well, currently, certain things I can't talk about publicly because I, can't give it away. But there's just a few different things that are sort of kind of being put in place and waiting for the right time and moment and person and different things. It's pretty clear that the way that our exemption is now on the form is extremely unconstitutional. I mean, it's really not a question. But the problem is that it comes down to each individual school district to enforce the law however they kind of see fit. They've just been given kind of, well, it's two things. They've been given carte blanche, but they've also been given this kind of ridiculous responsibility of having to deal with it, and so it's not consistent across the state. We begged and pleaded and asked, at the state level for the Department of Education or the state Board of Education or anybody that has authority over the schools to try to get something consistent going, some consistent communication. It didn't happen, and so as a result, the Department of Health, came out with their form, which, by the way, the form that we have was in existence for almost an entire year before we were allowed to see it. They lied. They said it didn't exist. They didn't have it. It wasn't ready. On and on and on. It finally, because of a colleague of mine doing an open records request, was able to get not only the form, finally, this was, late last fall, but also a whole bunch of correspondence between the Department of Health and other parties such as California Immunization Coalition and different doctors, and there was a lot of disturbing communication about how they were going to implement this, and then it became very clear that they were withholding information from the public. They wouldn't release the form even though it existed. The governor's office was extremely uncooperative about the entire thing, and so as a result, like I said, it's a mess. I don't know how else to describe it. It's a mess, and so currently different options are being looked at, and it's kind of one of those, figuring out what is going to be the best path forward in terms of we don't want to do something that would compromise. But you got to understand that if you end up at the Supreme Court level, you don't want a bad precedent to be set. We have reason to believe it would go in our favor. However, stranger things have happened. So it's one of those things. Time is going to tell. I don't know what to say about it other than we all need to hope for the best, pray, and we need to be vigilant. We need to be educating everybody we can in whatever way we can, because without I don't know, just monumental outcry from people who want to preserve their rights, I don't know which way this is going to go. So.
Yeah, and speaking of that, it seems like, with this law that they've introduced, it's like an incremental step towards mandatory vaccination.
It absolutely is. It is.
So I was just wondering, have you come across any other information that points to how, or any other laws that are being formed that points to how the government is planning to incrementally introduce mandatory or mass vaccination on the population?
Well, there's a lot of really interesting things going on around the country right now. I think one of the most disturbing things going on that I just found out about is, the state of Rhode Island, which is teeny tiny. They're so tiny that they don't really have a board of health per se. They have I guess you could call him a health guy. Okay, they have one guy who sets policy. And he has decided, and you have to ask yourself this question, okay, how much did they pay him? He has decided to set the policy for school and daycare required vaccines, and I want to I'm going to qualify this with I could be wrong about this part, but I want to say it impacts potentially daycare workers and employees. I know it's students, but it could be workers. But he decided on his own that kids are going to have to receive every single vaccine that's available under the CDC schedule, not just the ACIP recommend. California, we don't require every single vaccine. There are all kinds of vaccines out there, but each state determines which ones are going to require for school. For instance, flu vaccine is not required. No vaccine is really required because we have an exemption. But if you're going to look beyond that and say, well, what's on what most people think is required? California doesn't require flu, it doesn't require HPV, But in Rhode Island, even though it's a little teeny tiny state, this one particular individual who has a lot of power, because they don't have necessarily a health board, they have one guy, he's decided that kids need to get all of them. All of them. HPV, influenza, go down the list. Prevnar, Hep A. Prevnar and Hep A are still not mandated in California. So this is so bad that even the ACLU, who will not get involved here in California, we have begged them to get involved with the AB 2109 issue, and they won't. They just are absolutely horrible. They will not even, it just doesn't even bother them at all, anything that's going on regarding the vaccine issue.
Who's the ACLU? Could you just...
The American Civil Liberties Union.
Oh, gosh, you. Okay, yes.
Yeah, and, what you find is it depends on what part of the country you're in. Sometimes they can be phenomenal, they can get involved, and they can really make a difference, and they can really turn stuff around. They will not get involved in California. But in Rhode Island, my point is, what's going on in Rhode Island is so bad that even the ACLU is mad and is getting involved. And why it's important is that this is how they do things. If they can get one state, and it doesn't really matter if it's a tiny state, if they can just get a ball rolling a certain way, then they can use it as an example, and they can start pushing that same, agenda elsewhere.
Beta
and
testing.
So, and I'm sure you've heard, there was the flu vaccine issue in New York City that was going on. There's all kinds of examples around the country where, I would say taking kind of forced vaccine policy way too far. And it's happening at a very rapid rate, and it's happening all over the country. And like I said, things are amping up. There are just so many fires to put out all over the country. I can't really count them all right now.
Yeah, I know. And not just with vaccines and a lot of other things, but...
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then speaking of that, are you familiar, Dawn, with the Common Core thing that's going on in this
Yeah,
schools?
absolutely, which is another just...
Right.
Sometimes I just have to say, this is surreal. I can't believe what we're living in.
Right, I know. It's like between the AB 2109 and the Common Core all getting instituted in the California next school year, I think, most of the districts, I don't know if every district is taking on the Common Core, but I think most of them are. Anyone who's taking federal funding will be. And everybody knows we're broke, so they're going to take the money if they get it. And so it just doesn't even seem like it's safe to send kids to school anymore.
No, I would agree. I don't think it is safe. And that brings up, it just popped in my head, somebody finally brought to my attention, there could be others, I haven't done a search myself, but someone did do a search of the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System and found what we think is the first reported, not that there haven't been others, I'm sure, but the first reported Gardasil-related death of a teenager in California. I believe the child was 12 years old and was a male. And we have the bill AB 499, which allows kids as young as 12 to get an HPV, any STD vaccine. So it could be HPV, it could be Hep B, or anything that down the road that comes out without their parents' knowledge or consent. What is not clear at this point is whether or not this child's parents actually allowed the vaccine, or if he did receive it without his parents' knowledge or consent. All we know at this point, or all I know, is that a 12-year-old did die in the state of California as a result of that vaccine. And, last session, Assembly Member Tim Donnelly sponsored AB 599, which was going to remove that and would not allow kids to receive any vaccines without their parents' knowledge or consent. But that bill, of course, failed because it had to go through the Assembly Health Committee, which is chaired by Dr. Richard Pan, the sponsor of AB 2109. And he ensured that the bill was killed immediately. It didn't get out of committee. So, kids 12 and under, 12 and up can still go get any STD vaccine without their parents' knowledge or consent. And, unfortunately, Gardasil, it's turned out to be one of those vaccines that's, it is causing death, and it's causing severe permanent disability in teenage kids that were previously completely healthy. I see a practitioner in Reno, Nevada, and recently he told me that he's had all kinds of young teenage girls come in that were previously completely healthy, straight A students, cheerleaders, you name it, athletic. They go get a Gardasil shot, and they are never the same.
Yeah, we have a friend that actually has come on our show and told her story about that, and it's absolutely devastating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sarah Sotomayor, she's got a blog called sarahshealingjourney.wordpress.com if anyone wants to check it out. But it's just as what you're describing, Dawn. She went in at 13, and she got the Gardasil shot. She was a healthy, athletic girl, and she's 20 now, and she's still struggling to restore her health. She's still unable to walk. She's, and she's very bright, very
exceptionally
smart.
brilliant girl. Yeah,
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Exceptionally brilliant. But it hurts because we care about her a lot, and she's a very good spirit, and she has a good heart and a good soul. But she's not. It's very unfair when you see a young person like that who's just kind of can't go out and do
how's
the
their
things
life?
that young people get to
their
do.
life kind of taken away or changed overnight? It's unbelievable,
Right, exactly.
and parents in California need to know that their kids, their kids are going to be targets. Especially if they're going to a public school, they could be coerced, they could be bribed, they could be offered, who knows what. Get your HPV and you're going to get whatever, a free iPod or
yeah.
X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
This is real. I'm not, we're not making this stuff up. It's going on, and people just sometimes I see people not really taking it all that seriously, and it's dead serious. They should really. I am at a place where I don't think a public school is a very safe place for a child at this point in time.
Yeah, me too.
So
for so many different reasons, but
for more reasons.
Yeah, more reasons than
vaccines,
10.
But
yeah.
I'm at a point in time where I'm just very thankful that I don't have young children. And my heart goes out to anyone who does, because I sit here and think, how are they going to navigate what's ahead of them? It's not to be a downer or depressing, but we really are going to need some help here in California. And I did bring up Tim Donnelly's name, and I'm not trying to turn this into a political, campaign or whatever. But I will say, Assemblymember Tim Donnelly, who is seeking the nomination for the GOP nomination for gubernatorial candidate for California, has gotten extremely involved in the vaccine issue, really helped out with 2109, sponsored AB 599. He absolutely believes in parental rights and that we should have the final say in any medical decisions for our children. And I just hope that California does the right thing and can see that he wants to take our state in a different direction than it's going. I think it's critical. Yeah. So I don't, believe me, I'm not a fan of either party, okay? But
right.
I'm really not. I'm actually a libertarian. But I just think, I know Tim Donnelly personally, and I got to know him because of AB 2109, and I know where he's at with this issue and a lot of other issues, and I hope people will give him a really serious look, because the man he's a good man.
Well, that's good, and that's really rare, as you say.
Very rare.
You hate both parties. I mean, it's especially in politics.
I know.
I mean, it doesn't generally attract like the best element. Usually people that want power.
No, and he's. I can honestly say, I mean, he's just not like that at all. He's just kind of one of us. He's he's somebody that if I sent him a text message right now, he would text me back before the night's out. He's that kind of guy. He's I think he's touring the state right now, just doing whatever he can, and is really passionate and really moved. He was really moved by the 2109 battle, and really listened and really got to know the issue, and was really touched by the injury that's out there, and the the autism epidemic and all of it, and totally gets that it is vaccine induced, and it goes beyond just the injury and the nightmare and the personal pain and all of the horror. This is an issue that's going to affect our society for some time to come. We're going to have kids they're going to live a long time. Their parents are maybe not going to be there forever, and what's going to happen to them, and who's going to take care of them, and how what are we, as a state, what are we going to be facing in terms of dealing with that? I mean, it's just such a huge issue. It's mind-boggling to even think about, but the bottom line is, in my mind, my motto is the poisoning needs to stop now. I don't, how we accomplish that and how we get there, I don't know, but I'm committed to making it happen one way or another.
Right. Yeah, first things first, like clean up this environment. And, but speaking of that, I mean, if have you ever come across any protocols or anything, any advice that you give people who got vaccinated and then they say have a reaction, or then they do it and then they go, oh no, I regret it now that I know the information. What can I do to kind of like detox or reverse? Do you give any advice on that?
Well, it depends. It's because there's so many different different aspects, but I definitely recommend seeking a practitioner that deals with that. And there are several, and they all take different approaches. There's, everything from homeopathic help to, the people want to ostracize chelation, but I do know that people have had a lot of success with chelation. I know hyperbaric oxygen therapy has helped a lot of kids, and I actually know quite a few parents who utilize that for their children who have autism, and there are practitioners doing that. There's one in the Bay Area, Dr. Ken Stoller. I mean, there's definitely help out there that does make a difference. Because I haven't personally been through recovering a child, I'm not the best, person to ask. I don't have specific examples, but I'm certainly in contact with the right people who can, who do on a regular basis give that kind of direction and guidance and help and point people to the right practitioners. So, if people contact me, I can I'm pretty good at filtering, like, what are they looking at, what are their needs, and who would I set them up with to at least have a conversation and get going. Because there is hope. There are kids who do recover, sometimes fully, sometimes a good portion of the way. It's all different. But I just would like parents to know that it's not like you're just sitting there with absolutely no hope or no help at all. Granted, everything costs money, and that's extremely unfortunate because it leaves people with no resources kind of left with not a lot of help. So.
Oh, have you come into across any information or legislation that talks about the RFID chip?
I personally have not, other than when I did read the original version of the Affordable Health Care Act. There was some stuff in there about utilizing and implementing it. And so, and I've heard other people talk about its use in different. Yeah, I have no sort of. I don't have any doubt that it's coming. That it might even be here. What have you heard?
I've just heard talk of people saying that they want to put them in the vaccines and give them to people, but I don't know a lot of information on that, so I was just curious.
I'm pretty certain that the technology is there. I do know that.
Yeah. No, they exist. They're there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Whether or not there's, I'm not aware of any legislation at this very moment. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, because it very well could. That is, seeking to implement that. But wouldn't surprise me at all if we had something pop up tomorrow. I mean, it's something that's eminent in my opinion. Because there has been so much talk of it for so long that I would be shocked if we didn't see it sometime soon. And so that's one of those things where I ask myself, okay, is that going to be when people, but I'm kind of getting, I don't know, I'm kind of at that point where I've asked myself that so many times, and then I see people just go along with everything that, maybe they're just not going to have a problem with that either. As you stated earlier, I mean, things are incremental. They're very good at turning up the heat slowly, boiling the frog,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of what we're in. And then when we talk about it, we're labeled as conspiracy theorists and, wacko, anti-vaccine nut jobs. So,
Right, which is...
Well, we're just, I just reply to that with, conspiracies are not theories if they're real. They're just conspiracies at that point. And people do conspire. They have since the beginning of time. And I'm a realist. I also get accused of being, a pessimist on a regular basis. And I think there's a very fine line between pessimism and realism. I want to be optimistic, of course, and if I didn't have any optimism, I wouldn't be doing what I do, because I do believe everything that we are doing, it makes a difference. It's important. It's what if it's our calling and it's what we're doing, we need to do it. But I also look at things with a realistic lens. But I hate for that to be confused with pessimism. I'm not pessimistic. I'm just trying to wake people up and say, you need to be a realist. You can't live in unicorn cotton candy land forever. I mean, you can try, but it's kind of like once you get bitten in the butt, your attitude changes. So.
Yeah, I mean, people just sometimes, it doesn't seem like that they're going to learn until they have a vaccine injury themselves. It's someone they love or someone they know. And honestly, that's what it took for April and I. Honestly,
well, that's what it took for me. I mean, I try to cut people slack to some degree because I realized that I was one of the, I had to lose my daughter to learn. However, once I had to decide for my son, I mean, I really had to take an honest, serious look at things, and I had to be honest with myself, and I had to admit to the mistake I made. But at least I could do that. And I can't remember where I read this, but it has stuck with me. And it is that, a smart person learns from their mistakes. But a really smart person learns from other people's mistakes. And, this came up for me on Monday, would have been my daughter's 19th birthday, were she still here. And, I kind of reached out to some close friends who've also lost children to vaccines, and I just sort of have to do that at that time of year. It's what I need to do to get through it. And, I had a conversation with a mother that's been a friend of mine forever who lost her daughter walking and talking, okay? We're talking 18 months old, walking and talking. Had an MMR and a DPT vaccine and died that night. And the autopsy showed that, the MMR vaccine caused her brain to swell to the point it killed her that night. She did go through the vaccine injury compensation program, and it took her 7 years, despite the fact that the autopsy there was no arguing. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. It still took her 7 years to go through it. Anyway, she and I talked on, my daughter's birthday this past week, and we had that conversation about, a smart person learns from their mistakes, but a really smart person learns from other people's mistakes. And, we talked about the pain of what it's like to live this long, 19 years for me, 22 years for her without our daughters. Like, I don't have another daughter. I have a son, so I'll never know what it's like to have a living daughter. And, we had this conversation that at this point, the real pain that is just unbearable almost, is that I'm sitting here with this information, and I understand that death is rare, and that's not where I start with people when I talk about vaccines, because the reality is, if your kid gets a vaccine, are they going to die? Probably not. They could. It's more rare. Right. What's common is the chronic illness, all of the other things, and autism, diabetes. Let's go down the list. It's a mile long. The real pain for me is having to watch these people that have me as a resource, or they have information at their disposal, and they still refuse to take the time and put in the effort for their child to make an informed decision. And that pains me and hurts me more than I can put into words.
Yeah.
It's just beyond. So at that point, what can you do? You move on, and you do your best, and you just move on, and you hope that, someone else is going to be receptive. But
and I'm sure you have reached some people, Dawn,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
but,
I mean,
you think back, and for me, I think back and I go, what if somebody just would have given me a pamphlet or something, anything? I'm the kind of person that would have looked into it, but I wasn't given anything. I knew nothing. I didn't even have any inkling that there could be anything suspect, but we're talking 19 years ago, so.
Wow. Well, Dawn, we thank you so much for being on the show again, and for opening up and sharing that with you, because I understand how you feel. I mean, I have a vaccine-damaged son, and he's severely autistic, and I get that feeling too sometimes when you see people and they're just going to go down that road that you went. It's almost like reliving it. It's because you feel that pain of like that you had when you lost your child. And, I also lost my son in a way. I mean, he's still here, but he's not the same person. And so it hurts that I see other people doing it, or even people sometimes who have autistic children and they're still vaccinating them and they're getting worse and they're not getting better. They're, just not doing any of the, and they're not doing any of the things that they need to do to help them recover, as you were talking about before. And because you can, even if you don't do everything, you can do some, even if you just like clean up their diet or some things, you can actually restore their health. And it hurts me to see them not even want to talk about it, and not even want to like entertain the idea that maybe they could get just a little bit better, and so it's I appreciate you expressing that and sharing your story with us and being on the show as always. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. So before we let you go, can you please remind everybody where they can reach you and how they can stay informed on this issue?
By all means, I still have my email address, which is hapi.vaxinfo@gmail.com. And I do encourage people to, go ahead and join Californians Against AB 2109 Facebook page, because it's become, obviously not about AB 2109 anymore, but it's just about everybody staying apprised of what's going on in California and sharing information on all topics vaccine related, and just making connections and people making friendships and kind of figuring out what we can do. I'm really hoping that this next this year 2014 that we can sort of get back at it and become proactive and start doing some things out in the open, just proactively to educate and get the word out, and hope that maybe we're going to see a shift in our state government. I have no idea, but if I can tell you right now, if we were to see Tim Donnelly become our governor, yes, we would by all means see some changes with respect to this issue, and I just can't encourage people enough to at least join that page and to join the NVIC's advocacy portal, which is just www.nvicadvocacy.org, and stay abreast of what's going on in terms, because we could end up with a bad bill in this state at any time. Currently, I'm not aware that we have anything terrible, but it doesn't mean that can't change, and it doesn't mean that we, won't in the future. And the jury's still out on, how AB 2109, it's being implemented sort of in a shotgun approach. It's kind of like it's a free-for-all. School districts are doing whatever they want. I'm hearing just all kinds of different horror stories from all over the place, and parents really just need to stand strong and understand that they still do. The bottom line is they still have the right to an exemption. They absolutely have that right. That has not changed. What's changed is how they go about getting it, which is unfortunate. But I'm always here. If anybody emails me, I do my best to get back to them and help them with whatever I can, and make sure that they can get their child whatever they need to attend. Yeah, and it does affect homeschoolers. People need to know it affects everyone. People like to kind of categorize and say, oh, well, I'm doing this, it doesn't affect me. I can assure everyone that eventually it's going to affect you if you're not paying attention. So,
right. Absolutely. You can't
That's
just act
where we
like you're
are.
complacent. That's how we get into this mess in the first place. Is thinking that it's not going to affect you. That's how you get into this mess in the first place. Is that's how you make that mistake, because you think it's not going to.
So,
but it is. It could, and it probably will at some point. So just keep abreast of what's going on, and certainly anyone who's listening who wants to get in touch with Dawn can contact us, and we can put you in touch with her as well. And thank you so much, Dawn, and we always appreciate having you on the show. You're welcome back anytime, and enjoy the rest of your
Always
evening.
good to be here. Thanks for all that you do, everything that you do. I appreciate it, and I know so many others do, and I look forward to doing it again. So
thanks again, Dawn, so much.
All right. Yeah, thanks for weekend. Everybody stay tuned. We're going to take a short break. When we get back, we're going to be talking to Kevin Annett. But we thank Don Winkler. It's been wonderful as always.
Olivier, we had decided that 9/11 was an intelligence operation. We'd all known about JFK, had so many mistresses. The CIA shot him. Castro could never have done it. It was clear. We had become realists, conspiracy realists. How would we let everyone know was the question. We decided to buy T-shirts that told the contents of our hearts and minds to the world. We went to shop.truthattease.com. Even though the internet hadn't been invented at the time, we went to shop.truthattease.com. There we purchased conspiracy realist T-shirts, one of a kind, sold only at shop.truthattease.com. 100% cotton in men's and women's fitted sizes. I won't tell you which one I'm wearing.
Hey there, thanks for listening to Truth or Talk. Today we are bringing back a former guest. We've had him on a couple times before, Kevin Annett. Kevin is a 2013 Nobel Prize nominee. He is the community minister, human rights consultant, and field secretary for the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, which he's also the co-founder of. He is an award-winning documentary filmmaker for the film Unrepentant. He is an author, and his publications include Love and Death in the Valley, Hidden from History, the Canadian Holocaust, Hidden No Longer, Genocide in Canada, Past and Present, which can be found at hiddennolonger.com, and Unrepentant, Disrobing the Empire, which you can find at itccs.org and kevinannett.com. Please welcome to the show, Kevin Annett. How are you, Kevin?
I'm fine. Thanks for having
Kevin.
me back.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Hello.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for being back on the show. We've had you on before, and as I mentioned in the intro, but just for anybody who's listening who's not familiar with your work, can you please briefly describe to our listeners what you do and what the ITCCS is?
Well, the ITCCS is a tribunal of groups now in 21 countries. The common denominator among the members are that in some way they suffered abuse or some kind of crime at the hands of the Roman Catholic Church. But my background for the last 20 years has been working with a lot of survivors of institutional abuse in Canada initially and now really all over the world. And our big success, of course, this last year is when we helped to convene a common law inquiry into the genocide in Canada. We successfully convicted a number of heads of church and state, including the former Pope Benedict, who was compelled to step down in the same 2-week period that the verdict came in. And that wasn't accidental. That was definitely because of one of the evidences that we surfaced was that he had signed letters ordering bishops in America and Ireland to cover up child abuse in the Catholic Church. So all of this is been adding fuel to the fire and been showing that citizens on the ground can bring about justice. And it's one of the reasons we're working very hard now in setting up common law courts in America and Canada and all over Europe.
So how does the Canadian Holocaust go all the way back to the Vatican?
In a nutshell, the Vatican, and especially the Jesuits, were the ones who set up the models for the Indian boarding schools, not only in Canada but in America as well. As early as the mid-1800s, the Jesuits had a plan to go in and basically destroy the traditional leadership in the Native community, impose a new kind of society run by the church, and then use that as a way to not only brainwash the children into being Catholics, or in the case of the other schools, Protestants, but actually take their land and resources, and in the process, depopulate the areas up to 90%. And we found that in the Indian boarding schools in Canada when I first began to interview people and do the work back in the mid-90s. We found right away that there was a direct tie-in between the attempt by the white colonialists to grab the land and to set up these boarding schools where they would, eliminate at least half the children in the schools. So definitely was part of a whole broader genocide agenda that went back many centuries. And in fact, papal laws going back to the 1500s were saying that if you weren't a Catholic, you didn't have right to your own land. And it kind of gave legal legitimacy to this whole conquest. So yeah, and it wasn't just because of a few bad apples. It was a whole system and it was that system we put on trial last year when we indicted these institutions for genocide.
So how is it that this has been so hidden from history, is the title of your book, and so it obviously is, because so few people know about it, and this happened in Canada, but also happened in the United States and many other places all over the world. So how is it so hidden?
Well, it's kind of like when you look at the best example I like to give is my wife taught in Japan for 6 years, and in none of their high school books did they talk about what the Japanese army did in China during the 1930s, how they killed over 10 million people. It's just wiped out of their history books like it never existed. That's what any culture does. They never talk about their own crimes. And when you whitewash your crimes and never teach it, naturally people aren't going to learn about it anywhere except from the survivors themselves. And, in Aboriginal communities, it's still the case that there are a lot of pressures brought to bear for people not to talk about this. I grew up in a heavily Aboriginal area in Winnipeg, in Canada. We never heard about any of this. I had to start learning it from the people on the ground. So, if you've got the history books and the media and everybody not talking about this stuff, you need a whole alternative kind of history bringing in. This is what we're starting to do. We're beginning to get this evidence and the material from my books and the films into the high school curriculums in a few places in Canada. I was just in New York, and we found the same thing in America when it came to these kinds of crimes. So it's a long process.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you've got to kind of reverse it somehow.
Yeah. And I'm sure another reason, too, why it's not, spoken about is that a lot of people that have experienced it, they probably have been threatened or scared, by certain authority figures or maybe political figures. So what are some of the scare tactics you would say that some of these people use to stop people from actually protesting or testifying or speaking out about these crimes?
Well, I can give you one specific example. When we first held a public forum in Port Alberni, which is where I had my church before I was fired, for bringing this stuff out. 2 years after I was fired, we held a public forum there in 1998 in Port Alberni, and one of the native guys who had been through the residential school there, the United Church School, a guy called Harry Wilson, he was about to stand up and talk about how he had found the dead body of a child on the grounds of the school when he was 8 years old. One of the native chiefs who was on the government payroll came over and actually told him, I think the exact quote was, "If you talk about that girl, Harry, you're going to end up floating face down in the water." Because this guy was working for the government, and Harry didn't say a thing. He shut up at that point. That's the kind of overt pressure that traditionally the government-funded chiefs have brought to bear, on their own people. It's, in Vancouver alone, 6 of the native people working with our network have died because of this. Beatings from police. One of the guys who identified Queen Elizabeth as having taken 10 children away from the Kamloops school and they were never seen again, he died in hospital suddenly after going public with that. That kind of thing can happen if you're a native person. In Canada especially, because you're not a citizen, you're under the thing called the Indian Act, where you don't really have any legal rights, especially if you're living on reserve. So, there's a lot of ways to shut people up. And, the fact that I'm still alive is probably because I'm white and I've got a lot of exposure. But if I wasn't, I would have long been snuffed, and long ago. And that's just the reality of what we're living under.
Wow.
Can you please talk a little bit about what's been going on lately? You mentioned that there's been some arrest of the ITCCS members in England, and there's also a new common law cases beginning in the new year.
Yeah, there was actually a couple of times. First of all, one of our organizers in Kitchener, Ontario, in Canada, they were setting up a court to look into how children today are being trafficked through the children's aid societies, where, these private companies are giving up to $100,000 for every child they take out of a family. So there's a profit motive there in grabbing children, and that happened to their own kids. So Steve Finney and Amy Smart, this couple, challenged the Children's Aid Society. Steve was picked up on a bogus charge of a unpaid trafficking ticket. They held him for 3 days without charges in a prison until we got a lot of pressure there. We were calling the Attorney General and others, and he was finally let out. The same thing happened over in England this last month. A man was actually picked up in Coventry, England, for distributing information about how we had successfully convicted Queen Elizabeth and others for these crimes. And they put him in a mental hospital in London. Under a law in England, Yeah, believe it or not, there's a law in England that says that if you publicly criticize a member of the royal family, you can go to be put in a nut house because you're considered a mentally, challenged person. So we got on the phone. There were so many phone calls going into that mental hospital in London that the administrator complained later they had to take the phone off the hook. There were so many people objecting to when they grabbed David Compan, his name was, and they eventually let him out after a couple of days. But so we're able to do that, but only because we're getting a lot of exposure all over the world and through these common law court cases. And speaking of that, there was a thing up at our site about that, itccs.org. We just announced 3 new cases. One of them is being launched by a woman in New Hampshire, actually, who is looking into the whole issue of mortgage fraud and how people are losing their homes because of the courts colluding with these financial agencies that don't even have the power to be conducting these mortgages. So that's one of the cases. Another one having to do with child trafficking, and the present Pope, Pope Francis, who actually had a history in Argentina of trafficking the children of political prisoners during the Dirty War, being held by the military government. Also, we're doing another case on the chemtrails and the threat to the environment posed by that. So, on many fronts, these courts are beginning, and we're looking all the time for citizen volunteers to be on the juries and that kind of thing.
Wow, I didn't realize that your court was so expansive, that you're tackling all these other issues like the mortgage fraud. And tell us a little bit about this case on the chemtrails. How's that working?
Well, there's a couple of groups. There's actually one in Vancouver and one on Long Island, citizens that are convening a case. And you see, the thing about common law cases, it's never about going after corporate bodies. We always name the individual person. So, for example, the chemtrail is case on Long Island is convening I believe it's the second week in February. They're having the first meeting in Huntington, which is a town on Long Island. And they're naming Bill Gates. They're naming the head of Monsanto. They're naming Barack Obama. The people responsible for authorizing these chemtrails, which are posing a threat to the world, really, and to the health of our people. So it's kind of beginning on that basis. And they primarily need people with a lot of the evidence, which will allow the prosecutor's office to lay the charges, issue the summonses, and that kind of thing.
Oh, I was going to say, going back to, you mentioned this law in England that makes it a crime to speak out against the royal family. So can you explain to our audience, what is this law, and how is this not just an open police state if people can't say what they're...
Well,
yeah.
It's funny, when you're in England generally is okay, but when you go to London, it's like a very weird place. They have 4 million closed-circuit TV cameras in the city alone, and you're always under surveillance. And this law, it's called the Fixated Threat Law. And in 2009, actually just before the Pope visited there, the Pope that we brought down, Pope Benedict, they brought in this special law, and it was probably because of a worry of protests and that. And it said, if you protest an issue, not just about the royal family, see, there's an old treason law in England that you cannot criticize a member of the royal family, but it was based on that, but it's broader. It says if you protest a public person, or you can be considered mentally fixated on the person, and they have the right to bring you in for a psychiatric examination. So there's 4 centers in London run by psychiatrists and the London police, where they bring you in and examine you. And if you are concerned about an issue, they can say that's a mental disorder and put you away. They were going to put David away for 30 days without charges in a mental hospital. It's kind of like what they used to do in the Soviet gulags and mental hospitals, where, if you're concerned about an issue consistently, that's considered a mental disorder. Anybody could be picked up under that criteria. So, it's a very dangerous law they have, and there's a member of Parliament, actually, who just spoke out the other day about it. Matt Taylor, he spoke out on the radio saying that this law is draconian, and it's the people in the power who've got to be investigated, not us.
Well, that's good, but I hope that he's okay.
Yeah.
Because it seems like there's not a lot. There should be more people speaking out about it, not just one person,
Yeah, exactly.
Could you tell us a little bit also, the Vatican recently made an announcement that they are above international law. So could you explain that to our listeners? I mean, these people, they just don't quit, do they?
No, they don't. Well, it doesn't really matter what Pope is in. He's just the figurehead. The real power is in the College of Cardinals and their bankers and others behind the throne. But after Pope Benedict was taken down, I mean, he was a widely hated pope. And they brought in this new guy, Francis, who's done an amazing public relations job. I mean, Time magazine named him Man of the Year. You know, he's posing as a saintly figure. In reality, what he's done behind the scenes is he's tightened up all the rules so that if you report child rape now in the Catholic Church, if you're an honest priest and you report child rape, you can actually go to a Vatican prison. They've criminalized any information leaks in the Vatican. So behind the scenes, you know, they're covering up this whole regime of child rape and trafficking that goes on widely in the Catholic Church. You know, there was a Philadelphia Monsignor, William Lynn, who went to jail for covering up the fact that over a quarter of the priests in Philadelphia were actively trafficking young children. And, you know, that's hundreds of priests just in Philadelphia area alone. So, I mean, this is a whole wide sickness, and the Vatican is doing their best to criminalize any reporting of these crimes. And so, you know, the latest thing they've done is you know, threaten people in that way. But they've also brought in a whole kind of reign of terror. So, for example, in Italy right now, anyone who even speaks to the media about this can face instant excommunication and expulsion from the church. So it's like, you know, behind the genial mask, there's all this other stuff going on.
You know, I'm just curious, though, how I mean, there are people that want to come out and speak about the atrocities they see going on within, like, the Catholic Church, don't seem to be a lot. So do you think that the people, that there are people that are watching stuff going on and not saying anything because of peer pressure, because of fear, or because they're actively participating in it themselves?
Well, you know, I mean, a lot of it is like what you say. It's fear. First of all, it's the fact that people are brainwashed from day one to think that if you're a Catholic, that there's something unquestionable about the Church, and that you're going to go to hell if you criticize the Pope because he is somehow your link to heaven. I mean, if you get conditioned enough at a young age, you really believe that stuff, and even if you don't believe it, you don't want to offend somebody in your family who does. And that's kind of the way that things stay quiet. But on the other hand, it's right from within the Catholic Church that you get a lot of people speaking out. Whenever I go to Ireland, you find a lot of people upset over there. There's, in fact, a whole group of Catholic priests that are trying to split away from Rome and set up their own independent church in Ireland, kind of like what happened in the Reformation 500 years ago. So, you know, there's encouraging signs all over the place. In fact, when I go, I'm going on a speaking tour in February through the States and then over to Europe in March. And one of the groups we're meeting with is that group in Ireland, and we're going to Rome again to hold more actions outside the Vatican. So, I mean, there's a lot of cause for hope, but the greatest strength these criminals in office have is the fact that the governments and the courts collude with them, and that's why we're setting up our own common law courts, you know, partly to deal with that.
It's like people have lost their moral compass, though, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
They have to, well, the law says it here, so well, I have to do what the law says, you know. It's ridiculous, you know. Switching gears a little bit, so I'm just, I would like to know, what is your opinion on the Catholic Church using vaccines and GMOs to commit genocide? Do you think that's kind of far-fetched? Do you think that's probable that they're also doing that as well?
No, they're a big investor in Monsanto. The Vatican, if you check on, I've got the link somewhere I could send you, but about 2 years ago on Google, on the internet, they had a reference to how the Vatican came out and said that they are actually had seen nothing wrong with GMOs, and they are a heavy investor in Monsanto. And
yeah, that's why I've seen it wrong.
You know, well, I mean, the Jesuits own Citibank. They have billions invested in the arms industry. And then another thing a lot of people don't know is the biggest small arms manufacturer in the world is called Beretta Limited. They're owned 100% by the Vatican, you know, this gun manufacturer. So, I mean, it's like people, you know, if they knew that, I'm not sure if they'd be so readily, you know, donating in the Catholic Church collection plate every Sunday, because that's exactly where the money goes. And definitely, you know, the whole kind of agenda of depopulation and vaccines and all that. They've from the beginning have been involved in that stuff. So I mean, it's only surprising for people who don't know the real history,
Yeah, because it seems a contradiction. A lot of people point out that the Catholic Church takes a stance against abortion, and yet they use aborted fetal tissues to make vaccines.
Right.
But they don't take a stance against vaccines. So why is that?
Well, and also in terms of the whole abortion issue too, they've never been against abortion of other targeted groups. For example, it was common practice in the Indian residential schools to abort, the fetuses of young native girls that were made pregnant by the priest. We've had eyewitnesses seen Jesuit priests bury live children beneath the floorboards in Catholic schools in South Dakota. We had eyewitnesses describing seeing that in the 1970s. So, no, they apply that whole morality quite selectively.
When you talk about the Catholic Church and the Vatican and its involvement in child trafficking and rape and abusing children and things like that, when you see something like a Penn State go on where that looks like something like that was going on, we don't exactly know. We just know that one guy was targeted, but it looks like something like that was going on. Is that partly connected, or do you see other types of situations like that where there's this child trafficking ring and it's connected to the Vatican?
I think it's heavily connected, and one of the reasons it is because there's a law that's been on the books in what they call canon law, like Catholic law. They consider them a law unto themselves. But under canon law, since 1929, there's this policy called Crimen Solicitanus, and we've reprinted it. People can read it if you go to hiddennolonger.com. It's right in Appendix number 9. This document was leaked to a London newspaper about 10 years ago, and Crimen Solicitanus is the policy governing the church officials, clergy, and everybody else when children are raped in the church. And it says, right in paragraph 11, it says that when children are harmed, the parents and the victim are silenced. They're not to tell the police. The police are never told, and the whole thing is covered up. And if it isn't covered up, the priest is excommunicated. And now, under the new rules of this pro prensis, he can even go into a Vatican prison. So it's a green light. If you're a child rapist, you can get ordained as a Catholic priest and be protected institutionally, legally, under church law. Now, what group in society could have that policy and get away with it, right? I mean, not only get away with it, but they're being funded by taxpayers' money. And, it's when a bishop goes to jail, like William Lynn did for covering it up, he was just enforcing church policy. It's the Pope that should have gone to jail, because he was the head officer, and that's why we put him on trial and convicted him last year.
And speaking of the Pope, you mentioned the newest Pope, Jorge am I pronouncing that right? Bergoglio?
Bergoglio? Is it Bergoglio?
Yeah. Can you talk about his background, and then he has specific involvement with child trafficking as well, right?
That's right. There's two priests who came out right after he got ordained and testified that when he was a priest in Argentina, he went from being a priest to being the head of the whole church in about 12 years. And that's because he was really close with the military junta there during the Dirty Wars, where over 30,000 people were killed by the military government there.
So I have a question really fast. So 12 years is really fast. How long does it take usually to
yeah. Usually he went from being a priest to a cardinal, which is very unusual. And the reason is he was not only doing a good, helping creating a good public image for the military junta around the world, but he was doing what the Catholic Church did in Spain under the Franco dictatorship, and that was they would take the children of men and women who were stuck in prison as political prisoners. They'd take their children and traffic them, put them into Catholic homes, raise them under other identities, and make a lot of money in the process. Bergoglio was very connected in doing that. And there's even a member of the government who used to be in the Argentine government. He's in hiding now in Spain. And he's going to come out this year and describe in detail how Bergoglio was doing that. Now, that's a serious crime. I mean, that can have him put away for life if he was ever put on trial under international law. Also, he obtained missiles, Exocet missiles, for the Argentine dictatorship. I mean, this guy is quite dirty. I think that's why he goes around in a nice white spotless robe now to try to create another image. But no, he was being named by his own people.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
That's terrible. I mean, and do you think what do you think it's going to take in order for this illusion to be, recognized by people, that the Catholic Church and what it stands for is just one big illusion, because so many people put their faith in it, and it's just there are people that are Catholics that are good, that are trying to do right by people, but it has to come down that these people are basically demons. I don't know. I don't really have any other word for them,
Right. Well, people, it doesn't really matter what you believe as long as it's not harming somebody else, and it is harming other people when not only Catholics putting money in the collection plate, but every American taxpayer has their money being sent to the Vatican Bank. It's called a financial concordat. A concordat is like a treaty between the Vatican and other countries. And your money is being, if you pay taxes, it's being sent, a percentage of it, to Rome. Now, we never voted for that, and the first thing to do is to talk to a congressman and senator and say, you don't want that. There's no reason why we have to be funding crime. As a matter of fact, that in itself is a crime under international law. We're not obligated to pay our taxes to a government, including our own, if it's involved in war crimes. So, that's the first thing. But also telling Catholics, look, you can be part of a church, but just don't be connected to Rome. Do what the Irish are doing and split off. Say, we're not sending our money to Rome. We're not acknowledging the local bishop or cardinal. We're just going to split off. And I've actually know a couple of priests in Canada who've done that. They've just taken their congregation and left. And, that's what people have to be doing on the ground. And actually, the number of people quitting the Catholic Church is increasing all the time. I think 30,000 people alone left the church in Austria last year. And so that's spreading as people wake up and see what they're part of, for sure.
Yeah, that has to be very hopeful that that's happening. But I have a question, though. You were talking about, like, the Catholic Church is trying to get away from Rome. So how hard, can't they just up and leave? What is so hard about them trying to split?
Well, one of the problems is that the property is all held by Rome. So, there'd be now, what we're trying to do in the common law court is to challenge that and say, canon law is not above the law of the land, common law. And priests just have to split off and say, look, it doesn't matter what happens to property or salary. There's something more important than that, and that's, the lives of children and all these other issues. So it can happen. It just, like anything, it requires somebody taking a lead, which is what we're starting to do, and the information getting out there widely enough, which is why, when the interview is done, not only posting it widely, but we have people, including myself, who are coming all through the States on a speaking tour, and I'd love to come to your area. I'm coming to the D.C. area, New York, all down the East Coast, and just speak to people on the ground about this. Go down to local Catholic churches and hand out some of our information about this so people know. They can read for themselves this stuff.
I was going to ask, are there current campaigns to remove tax funding for churches?
Yeah, there is. There's not enough. There are people in Canada, in England, who are trying to do this because, churches are, as tax-exempt societies, are supported by us. And when they're involved in crime, they should automatically lose that tax exemption. That's just the law. So, again, it's a matter of starting these petitions and letters and getting people aware of this.
Can you tell, our audience how, on a practical level, they can get involved with the ITCCS and start setting up their own courts, so how they can make that come into fruition?
Yep, you can first of all, go to the site, itccs.org. We've also started up a new common law court website, the International Common Law Court of Justice. The site is www.iclcj.com. That's iclcj.com. And on there, and on the itccs.org site, you can find common law training manual, reading about how to set up these courts. You can write to me at hiddenfromhistory1, like the number 1, hiddenfromhistory1 @gmail.com. And, just book me to come in and speak in your area. And I'm going all over the States organizing these common law courts. There's groups setting up in the Midwest, all over the East Coast, that are responding to this. So I would say just, first of all, educate yourself and then take the next step and help us set up these courts and groups in your community.
Okay. And you guys have had some success. When we saw, Virstyne and I both talked about this when we saw the former Pope had resigned, we're like, I wonder if
Kevin Annett had something to do with that.
Yeah, I wonder if these saying had something to do with that. And so, can you talk about that and tell us what happened?
Well, there was a direct connection because just 6 days before Benedict resigned, last February 11th, on February 5th, the Vatican Secretary of State got a diplomatic note from a government in Europe, and they still haven't come out because they're presenting that they're starting up their own case against the Vatican. But this government issued a diplomatic note saying if Pope Benedict ever set foot on their territory, they'd arrest him based on the evidence they saw in our court proceedings. And 6 days later, the guy steps down, which had never happened in history before. No pope in peacetime had ever resigned. And then, not only that, but another fellow named in our indictment, this Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone, he was Secretary of State. He stepped down as well. He was the most powerful Italian cardinal in the Catholic Church. And these guys don't just step down while they're in office unless there's this evidence coming out about them. So, yeah, there was a direct connection between us publishing that and then them taking that action, and then the present Pope coming in to do the whole spin operation to make themselves look good. But it all came out because of that evidence that we went public with.
And, just to kind of give people a gravity of the situation, because when we're talking about all this stuff in the child trafficking and the things that go on, I mean, if you go and you listen to some of these audio tapes on your website of the people and what they've gone through, it's really, really horrible and horrifying. Can you give us, just an example or two of some of these stories for our audience listeners, just in case they're quite grasping what we're talking about here?
Well, I mean, the example I gave earlier, a woman, Clarita Vargas, a native woman from the Omak, Washington. She's in the West Coast native tribe. When she was a teenager in 1971, she saw a Jesuit priest bury a newborn child under the floorboards of that school, Jesuit school in Omak, Washington. And they went, the law firm went to the FBI and tried to get the grave exhumed, and they wouldn't do it because the Catholic Church didn't give them permission. I mean, you've got to go to the serial killer to get permission to dig under his house. Since when? But, that's the kind of power the Church has, and the way the government colludes with them. But there's a lot of other stories. I mean, the very first story I ever heard when I was 20 years ago now, over 20 years, on the west coast of Canada, a little girl kicked to her death down a flight of stairs at a residential school because she was crying for her mother. And then they write down on the death certificate it was heart failure, but they don't say that she was murdered by the school principal. 50,000 more kids never came back. And that's just in Canada. The figure was much higher in America. Sterilization programs, exposing kids to tuberculosis and then letting them die en masse. That was kind of the favored technique used to depopulate the area to get rid of their Indians. And then, more broadly, just the child trafficking that still goes on all over the place. Something like 100,000 children go missing in America every year. And, we're working with groups of survivors. There's a group in New York called SMART, and they're survivors, over 1,000 people that survived ritual abuse. So, satanic sacrifice of children, government mind control programs, all of this stuff's being really well documented. There's been books published about it, and we're bringing this stuff out now. So it's really horrible to hear about that, but for the first time it seems kind of mind-blowing. But if you don't open the wound, it's never healed, and this is a lot of the work that I do every day on the ground.
I was going to say, I'm sure you get some kind of resistance because, there are people that, even though there's evidence out there to back up what you're saying, there are people that refuse to look into the evidence. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's the usual denial syndrome. When you're hit with something you just can't believe. Like, when you're raised in a church or society your whole life and you don't hear these things, it's just, psychology, they call it cognitive dissonance. Your mind just goes click and you glaze over and you just can't accept it. And it doesn't seem to have anything to do with your life. But that's because you've been living a false life. You've been fed lies your whole life. And there's kind of a deprogramming process that anyone goes through. But at a more basic level, there's a lot of people who are guilty of this stuff, who are still in power in the church and the government, in corporations, and they don't want this stuff coming out. So they do their best to use the usual kind of smear tactics, character assassination. These tactics are used widely against any whistleblower. And they've been used against me. They've even had native people speak out against me. Now, some of that is because, like in the white world, not all Native people are in agreement about whether this stuff should be talked about, and you don't have to be in agreement. But the point is, let's look at the evidence and not this name-calling and hearsay, which is what they do. Have you heard this about Kevin Anna? Without ever really looking at the evidence, because I'm not really the issue. The issue is this evidence and those children who are still in the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I think, a good sign, too, if they have to go to your personal attributes instead of looking at the evidence that that shows that you're having some kind of effect. Because if they're so, confident in their stance, they wouldn't have to do that. So what was...
Right, and the telling piece of evidence is, in over 20 years that I've worked on this, not once have I been taken to court by anybody. Now, you'd think if you were the church and the government or anybody who was being falsely accused, the first thing they'd do is drag me into court to disprove it. But they never have. And that, under the law, if you don't dispute a charge, you're agreeing with it. You're not contesting it. And in our common law court case against the Pope and the Queen and everybody, not once did they contest what we said about them. They didn't respond to the public summons we issued, and they didn't come into court to challenge it. That means that they didn't disagree, that they were tacitly agreeing with it. And, that's the case with me, too. Nobody has ever tried to disprove the evidence. They've just attacked me personally.
What was it about you, I'm curious, that kept going? Because when we kept you going, because I remember, I think last year sometimes when we interviewed you, you said you started off, you were a priest, and you were trying to get the natives to join your church, and, people were mad that you were trying to get them to join your church, but you were like, I don't care. This should be for everybody. Why didn't you succumb to the peer pressure that was against? I'm just curious, because I feel like there's some kind of element. I don't know if you call it divine intervention. Like April and I always talk about this on the show, where the people that have the courage to come out and speak out against their peers. What is it about them? What is it in that person that makes them do something like that?
Well, it comes down to conscience. I couldn't live with myself knowing that these things were going on. If I can't look at myself in the mirror, how could I face my own children or the people around me? So it was simply a matter of conscience initially for me. But then as, put simply, the shit began to hit the fan more and more, it got me curious, saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why are they so determined to cover all this stuff up? And the more victims I met, the more I realized, well, look, if they can survive all these years after being tortured so horribly, and they're still trying to speak out, then I can. I have an obligation, because my culture did it, right? And that makes me an accomplice and an accessory to a crime unless I do something about it. So it was all of that. It was just a certain stubbornness and realizing, that within each of us there's kind of a hidden character, I think, which comes out in bad times. It's somebody we didn't even know. That part of ourselves that just gets harder and tougher the more stuff is dumped on us. And I think that that's often what I rely on, And it's also an unspoken quality. Who knows? I mean, it's all of the above, but I'm just glad to have survived this long, because, it's good to see all the crows come home to roost, and finally the table's being turned a little bit,
Yeah, did you ever have a moment where you were kind of like, you wish you could take it back? You're like, I wish it's just not, this is too much.
No, I'd never changed what I did, but there were times, in the bad times, in the few years right after I got fired, I wasn't seeing my kids at all. I lost them in the divorce that the church paid for, the custody dispute and all that. When I wasn't seeing my kids, and I didn't have any work, and I was living out of my car, literally homeless. Yeah, that was a very bad time. But again, one of the ways I dealt with my pain is I went and sat with other people in the healing circles, and I went out on the street. I had a long history of doing street ministry, and those people kept me going, right? And I think there's a lesson there that we do it together. It isn't about superheroes or going in healing on your own. We've got to do this work together, and that's what I've kind of proven over the years, that has results when you do it that way.
Wow. So it's kind of like, in turn, they inspired you by coming out. It's kind of like it's like a circle of, I can't think of the word, but that's very interesting. So that's a good message, I guess, to people that need, that come out and talk about their atrocities. It actually heals people, other people, too, not only themselves,
Always got to do it in a group. And, you know, I remember a lot of the Native men and women I work with, they often will say the same thing. Going to a psychiatrist or counselor never did any good for me, but it was only when I could meet other people who'd been through the same thing. I mean, that's true about any 12-step group or AA or anybody. We need that community around us to have the courage to talk, right?
Yeah, and to see, too, if you can see somebody else did it, you know, then you can do it. And, yeah, that is very interesting because, I think a lot of people, I mean, psychiatry is a whole other show. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I think that, you know, just having somebody that knows what you're going through, that can talk through it with you, that it makes a huge difference as opposed to somebody telling you what they read in a book or like throwing diagnoses on you. And maybe they are trying to help you, not that they're a bad person, but I just think that you can only do so much, you know.
That's right.
You know, switching gears just a little bit, I read an article recently about the Vatican Monsignor Nunzio Scarno, who was arrested for money laundering. Had you heard about this?
Yeah.
And so
this is like an episode of The Sopranos.
He's been arrested for money laundering. But I guess that's a good sign then. I guess because they're being, you know, called out on their BS, right?
Yeah. Well, money laundering is an old practice. The Vatican Bank has been doing it for a long time. That's been proven, and even the American Security and Exchange Commission several years ago warned bankers not to deal with the Vatican Bank because they couldn't guarantee that it wasn't dirty money. And they've been called out a lot, especially in Europe. The Vatican Bank is under heavy investigation. So, yeah, it's not a new thing, but it's more exposed nowadays, and that's why people can't go back to sleep. They've got to keep pushing because now's a golden opportunity to really stop this stuff. You know, not just tinker with these institutions, but, I mean, look, get rid of them altogether. We don't need people who are worshiping Jesus Christ do not need a multinational corporation to do it with, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We were just talking to somebody, and he was saying, you know, the Bible is, I mean, it's basically, you know, teaches you about natural law, about your natural rights as an individual, and really doesn't have anything to do with this sort of like caste system that, you know, there's all these authority figures in charge and things like that. And so, speaking of that, I heard you talking about the United Church of Canada Act and how they've been involved in this depopulation Indigenous people. So can you describe that to us and explain that a little bit?
Well, the United Church of Canada is the biggest Protestant church in Canada. It's got a liberal kind of tradition and reputation, but they were set up by the Canadian government, or actually the Crown of England, in 1925. And when you read through the United Church of Canada Act, it gives them the powers of a bank, which doesn't make a lot of sense at first, but the thing to realize is that their missionaries were often the first into the area, and they would grab whole areas of land and set up the Indian boarding schools to get rid of the Indians, and then broker the land for a lot of money. And that's actually the issue that got me fired when I found out the church had been doing that on the West Coast. They were selling off land to this big American logging company called Weyerhaeuser, which is based in Seattle, and getting a lot of kickbacks for it. And I wrote to the church about that and got fired and blacklisted and everything that led to this. But so, you know, behind the facade of these churches are corporations, and that's what people have to realize. You know, that the United Church, like the Anglican, the Church of England, I think you call them Episcopalians in America, the Anglicans, the United Church, the Catholics, they're all involved in a plan to deliberately wipe out whole peoples to get their land and resources, and that's genocide under international law.
Right.
I'm just curious. As a society, do you think we put too much faith in authority figures, so much that it's hard for people in such positions, or it's easy for people that are in such positions to abuse their power? You know?
Yeah, it is. It's I think there's something contradictory about the whole notion of representative democracy, because nobody can really represent somebody else. There's a much older tradition of direct democracy, where communities have the right to immediately call back any elected representative. They have the right through referendums. I mean, actually, in America, you have a much stronger tradition of that. In Canada, there's none of that. There's just that whole tradition of church and state working hand in glove to rule everybody. And that's why, actually, most of the common law courts that are being set up are in America, because there's already that tradition of the law being jury-led and run by the people and not by experts, right? But I think you've got a problem whenever you get any large number of people, because then people turn over their authority to somebody else, and then all these things can happen, all this corruption and everything.
And that's not just in the church. You see it with doctors. You see it with you know, celebrities, that people just hand over their faith. Like, you know, that too much that they, you know, they're like, oh, well, that person's a doctor. They can't be corrupt, or they're a policeman, or they're a priest, or, you know.
I think
it's
people
really
are less
bad
naive today than they used to be about that. I think there's a lot more awareness and a lot more jaded opinion about that, right? But if people get too jaded, they give up doing anything. They just sit back and say, oh, there's no point of trying to do anything, and that's not good either. So, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Then you can just kind of, you know, climb into a cave and get all like,
Right.
oh, it's all, everybody's, you know, people are all bad and there's nothing good about it.
Well, the thing is that people just kind of have to think for themselves. I think there's just a laziness that people have just given their power to all of these people. You know, like that's, you know, why we're doing what we're doing, because of the vaccine situation that happened, you know, with April and my cousin. And, you know, we put our faith in doctors, and, you know, not that they're, you know, doctors are all bad, but it's just that, you know, if more people would take the time to research certain things, right? Research your church before you join it, or research, you know, certain medical procedure, or look into, you know, instead of just being blindly, you know, giving their faith and energy and their power away.
Right. Well, everybody's got to be there, but you need the right information and evidence about that, and that's why, you know, we have to be our own media, we have to be our own resources on this, because there's not going to be somebody coming in and doing it for us.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, and then there's active people actively trying to cover these things up, you know. And speaking of that, I was a while ago, I remember reading about this thing that happened. I want to say it was in like the late 80s or early 90s. The Franklin cover-up of Boys Town.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? I remember hearing about that. And since then, you know, since I've studied your work and I've, you know, listened to you and stuff, I've often wondered how something like that, as I mentioned earlier, like the Penn State thing, ties into the Vatican, or if you have any known connection between the Franklin cover-up and the Vatican.
Well, as a matter of fact, yes, we work with. I was just meeting in New York City last week with a woman who knows a lot about that, and she showed how in the Franklin cover-up there was Catholic priests actively working in the whole thing. You see, these child trafficking networks are very wide, and they've got a lot of protection, and they invariably involve Catholic priests or officials, because, like I mentioned, with that law, you're protected if you're a child rapist institutionally, but in the church. So it provides an enormous kind of cover for all of this stuff to go on.
Wow. Yeah, I just was kind of curious about that, because whenever something like that comes up, I kind of go, I wonder if that's somehow connected, because as you said, it's vast, but then there's only like a certain small number of people that are actually involved, you know, or I mean, there's a lot, but when you consider how many people there are in the world, there's just a small number of people that are actually doing all of this, you know.
That's right.
And that's what you guys are trying to do, to try and bring these people to justice, or try and, you know, expose them for what they're doing to children and people. Yeah, it's wretched.
Well, it needs everybody in the community to watch and take care of children, right? And once that happens, then these things can't happen. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And then speaking of, Virstyne mentioned the vaccine issue, and then you know, I have a vaccine-damaged son, and she has a vaccine-damaged cousin, and I remember you saying something too about they used smallpox vaccines on the people in the residential schools to depopulate. So how many people were they successfully able to wipe out by doing that?
Well, the official death rate in the Indian boarding schools in Canada was around 50%. About half these kids never came back. A lot of it was from starvation, spreading disease, but there was a whole special program in these thing called Indian hospitals to try out experimental drugs to inoculate area kids with smallpox, and that actually wiped out, in the early years, that wiped out a lot of people. So yeah, all of that germ warfare was going on, but they also, in recent years, they used vaccines to sterilize people. There's been a lot of documentation about that, sterilization programs through public health vaccine, you know, and, you know, that's, you know, you can find a lot of that on the internet.
Right, yeah, I think that's there was a lot of they had that H1N1 swine flu vaccine they were giving to pregnant women, and all these women were having they were saying that pregnant women needed to take it because they were at higher risk, but then it wasn't approved for giving to pregnant women, and all these women were having miscarries and spontaneous abortions. It's like it's really, really high number. So it's quite obvious when you look at it that way that it's sort of used for depopulation measures or for sterilization or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, we're just about out of time here, but I wanted to thank you so much for being on the show once again. It's always great to have you, and you're certainly welcome back any time. But before we go, though, please once again, can you remind our audience where they can find your work and find the ITCCS and how they can get involved?
Yep. The websites are itccs.org and iclcj.com. You can write to me at hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com. And you can get involved just by contacting me and arranging a time when I can come and speak in your community. I'll be doing all of Canada and especially the eastern U.S. During February and March, and then I'm over to Europe after that. But just stay in touch, write to me, and I'll keep you guys all updated about everything.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much for your wonderful work, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, really.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for spreading the news.
All right.
Our pleasure. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hello, thanks for having me on your radio. Even though we're not from a famous rock and roll band, if we were, even though we sound a little like we are, we'd definitely wear a Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, because they're gear, aren't they? Oh yeah, they're really gear. I want to write a song about them. Conspiracy Realist t-shirts at truthatees.com. I gotta think of the middle eight. Shop.truthatees.com. What does that mean? It's the internet. What's that? I don't know. It's a net. It's between things. Shop.truthatees.com. What's that? It's where you get Conspiracy Realist t-shirts. Oh, gear.
Hey, welcome back to Truther Talk. You can check us out at truthertalk.com. Hey, Virstyne.
Hey, we're back.
We're back.
Yeah, that was a bit touching. The wrap-up was a bit touching. Had to compose myself a little bit, but it's great to know that there are people that like to take their experiences and try and help other people.
Yeah.
So they don't go through the same thing. And during break, April and I were talking about how, April gets attacked sometimes, by people, and I was saying it really infuriates me because all you're trying to do is help, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're referring to our interview in the first segment, which was Dawn Winkler, and she had lost a child 19 years ago to vaccination. She had been vaccine damaged, and she died as a baby. And so that was a very touching story, as always, as we've had her on before, so we knew that about her. And so we didn't know if she was going to want to talk about it or not, but she did. And it's always very moving to hear that story. And and she, like myself, when we tell our story, it's not to get people to feel sorry for us or to people to, it's just to help share so other people won't make the same mistakes that we did, because it's painful when you see other people doing it.
Yeah.
And you see other children suffering, it hurts.
Yeah.
And you see these people go around and, like you brought up Paul Offit or these people like Bill Gates, and they go around and they talk about us, people like Dawn and myself, and
they're heartless.
You and your cousin, who also had a vaccine damaged child, and they talk about us as if we're just like we either we don't exist or we are delusional, or we, I mean, they refer to the anti-vaccine movement with these people who are tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists, but they don't directly talk about those of us who have documented our child's death or vaccine damage, and can actually give you examples of, like, this is what happened, this is when it happened, and I know this to be true, and because I was there and I witnessed it, and I'm not a crazy person.
Yeah.
So
it's
because
very, they care more about the being right than they do about the truth. That's I feel like these few months, it's all come down to, for me, is the fact that I feel that it's come down to that.
Intentions are at least good, even though they're ignorant. But in some cases, they're not. And some of these people, I don't think that they are. They're just, trying to, I mean, I don't know what exactly they're trying to do. I can say that I think Bill Gates is trying to kill people. I think that he is.
Yeah.
And as for Paul Offit, I don't know if he's trying to kill people or if he's just a narcissist.
I think he's a narcissist.
Yeah,
because,
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
That lecture that I watched that he gave entitled Communicating Vaccine Science to the Public, all he did was talk about how crazy people that even question vaccination are. He never talked about the science that proves the safety and efficacy of vaccinations. It was appalling to me because I thought, well, at least maybe he might have some points where maybe we can meet in the middle and, we can take some, but he didn't.
Right.
Like, not even a little bit. And what's kind of scary, too, is the people that, were basically drooling at his feet and kissing his ass were, didn't even seem to pick that up either.
Right.
Like I would be like, you're not talking about vaccine. It's like bamboozled, but their egos are high, and as Dr. Rima talked about, they when you go to medical school, you're kind of taught that you're better than everybody else.
Right.
Yeah,
and he definitely has this complex where he thinks he's better than other people. He thinks he's really smart. And, this kid who we should probably have on our show, I mean, he's a kid to me. He's in his,
Jake Crosby?
Jake Crosby.
I would love to have him, yes.
Yeah, he's a young man with Asperger's or high-functioning autism. And he's done the research on vaccines, and he knows that vaccines contribute to autism, including his own. And he's on several occasions tried to confront Dr. Offit about not only about this, but also about his financial misgivings, because he's basically making a lot of money on the vaccine industry. Do not kid yourself. Paul Offit is a very rich man.
Oh yeah, he's a patent holder for the rotavirus vaccine. Yeah. So how can you not have financial interest in promoting vaccines? That kills me too, because there are people that say, that somebody says something that's not necessarily something that somebody has heard before. They always like to say, "Oh, you're getting money from it," or "Oh,
right.
Really? Like, oh, you have special interest," as opposed to somebody like him. That's what he is doing, and you can prove that he's doing that. But nobody really, on the pro-vaccine side really has admitted that.
Yeah, right, exactly. And we also talked we talked to Don in the first segment. We also talked to Kevin Annett in the second segment, and we got into vaccines a little bit with him too, because we know that in the Canadian Holocaust they directly used the smallpox vaccine to eradicate not smallpox, but to kill
the people,
reduce
the
population.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just outright in your face that this is what's going on, and but these but someone like Paul Offit, he'll just call that crazy conspiracy and brush it off and not even acknowledge that this is going on at all, or not even that it's a eugenics.
You won't even read it because he's too good.
he's just too good, and he thinks he's a good guy. He thinks he's one of the good guys, and parents just don't know. And but on that note, I think we're just about out of time here, but we want to thank our guest, thank Dawn Winkler, who was with us in the first segment. She's always great, and she's been on 3 times. How funny! And then Kevin's also been on 3 times.
Oh, so a triple threat guest.
Yeah. Yeah, our triple threat
right.
guest. So Kevin Annett, you can find out his stuff at the itccs.org and find out what he's doing with the International Tribunal Against Crimes of Church and State, which is really interesting. We should file, I can't remember if he said anything about this, but there should be like a class action suit filed with the ITCCS against the pharmaceutical companies and their crimes against humanity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and doctors should file class action lawsuits for giving them wrong information and purposely teaching them to kill people. You know?
Exactly. File for our own vaccine damage, through the Vaccine Compensation Injury Act, which won't do anything, So anyway, but we thank you guys all for listening. You can find us at truthertalk.com. As always, peace, truth, and love, y'all.
Peace, truth, and love, you guys. Bye-bye.